Nara pressed her back against the cold metal wall, trying to make herself invisible in the shadows. Her pale blue hands shook as she tore open another food wrapper she'd found in the garbage. The smell made her want to throw up, but her empty stomach hurt so much that she had no choice. She hadn't eaten real food in 4 days. The marks on her neck burned like they always did when she felt ashamed. 3 jagged lines that glowed soft purple in the dark. Everyone could see them from far away. They told the whole galaxy that she was nothing, worthless, someone who should be ignored and forgotten. Other aliens walked past the alley entrance, their expensive clothes shining under the bright station lights. A group of tall, grey-skinned merchants laughed loudly as they headed toward the fancy restaurant district. None of them even glanced her way. To them, she might as well not exist. Nara found half a protein bar stuck to the inside of a container. It was covered in some kind of green slime, but she scraped it off with her fingernail and ate it anyway. The taste was horrible, bitter and sour at the same time. Her throat tried to reject it, but she forced it down. Hunger was worse than disgust. She remembered when food used to taste good, back when her family still claimed her as their daughter, back when she had a name that people spoke out loud instead of just calling her Exile or the Marked One. Her mother used to make sweet cakes that melted on her tongue. Her father would bring home fresh fruits from the orbital gardens. Now, those memories felt like dreams from someone else's life. A security drone floated overhead, its red scanner light sweeping the alley. Nara froze, not even breathing. If it detected her, she'd be moved along to some other dark corner of the station. The drone paused for a moment, then continued on its patrol route. She let out a quiet sigh of relief. The stomach cramps were getting worse. She wrapped her thin arms around her middle and rocked back and forth. When was the last time she'd had clean water? Yesterday? The day before? Time blurred together when you lived in the forgotten spaces between the station's bright corridors. She could hear music and laughter drifting from the upper levels where normal people lived their normal lives. They complained about their jobs, worried about money, argued with their families, but they went home to warm beds and full refrigerators. They had no idea how lucky they were to be wanted by someone, anywhere. Nara pulled her knees up to her chest and closed her eyes. Maybe, if she slept, the hunger would hurt less. Maybe she'd dream about her mother's cooking again, or maybe she wouldn't wake up at all, and this nightmare would finally be over. The exile marks on her neck pulsed brighter for just a moment, as if responding to her despair. They were designed to never let her forget what she'd lost. Every breath was a reminder that she was alone in a universe that had decided she didn't deserve to exist. But somewhere in the station's bright corridors above, a human named Jinho was finishing his shift at the supply depot, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. Jinho stepped out of the supply depot, stretching his tired shoulders after another long day of inventory checks and cargo manifests. The station's artificial lights were dimming to simulate evening, and most of the busy foot traffic had died down. He was looking forward to getting back to his small restaurant and maybe cooking himself a quiet dinner. That's when he saw her. Atio. First, he thought it was just another pile of discarded shipping materials in the alley. But then the pile moved, and he realized it was a person. A young alien girl crouched behind the waste containers. She was so thin that her pale blue skin seemed to stretch tight over her bones. Her clothes were torn and dirty, barely covering her small frame. Jinho stopped walking and watched in growing horror as she picked through the garbage with desperate fingers. She pulled out what looked like a moldy piece of fruit, sniffed it, then bit into it anyway. Her face twisted with disgust, but she kept eating. He'd seen a lot of things during his 15 years hauling cargo between star systems. He'd watched entire colonies struggle through famines. He'd delivered emergency supplies to refugee camps where people fought over scraps. But something about this girl hit him differently. Maybe it was how alone she looked. Maybe it was the way she tried to hide in the shadows, as if she was ashamed of her own existence. When she sensed someone watching her, she looked up quickly. Her eyes were the most unusual shade of violet he'd ever seen, beautiful and haunting at the same time. But it wasn't their color that made his chest tighten. It was the expression in them. Jinho had seen that exact look before, years ago, in the mirror after his own family had cut him off. Back when he was young and stupid and thought he could change the world. Back when standing up for what he believed in had cost him everything he thought mattered. The shame of being rejected by the people who were supposed to love you. The defiance that came from having nothing left to lose. The girl stared at him, like a cornered animal, ready to run or fight depending on what he did next. Most people would have looked away and kept walking. That's what you were supposed to do on stations like this. Mind your own business and don't get involved in other people's problems. But Jinho couldn't move. His feet felt glued to the deck plating. She had marks on her neck that glowed faintly, in the dim light. He didn't know what species she was or what those marks meant, but he could guess. Every civilization had its outcasts. Every society had people it decided weren't worth saving. The girl clutched the rotten fruit tighter and started to back deeper into the shadows. She thought he was going to report her or chase her away. Her whole body was tense, ready to run. Jinho's hand moved slowly to the pocket where he kept his meal vouchers. He had 3 left from this week's rations, more than enough for what he was thinking of doing. "Hey," he called out softly in Galactic Standard. His voice was rusty. He didn't use the universal language much except for official cargo business. The girl froze like a deer in headlights. People didn't talk to her. That much was obvious from her shocked expression. Jinho took a careful step closer, the way you might approach a wounded animal. His heart was pounding, though he couldn't say exactly why. The word hung in the air like a broken rule. Around the alley entrance, several aliens who had been minding their own business suddenly stopped and stared. A tall, insect-like trader actually dropped the package he was carrying. 2 blue-skinned merchants grabbed each other's arms and whispered frantically in their clicking language. Jinho didn't understand why everyone looked so shocked. He was just talking to someone who seemed hungry, but the reactions around him made it clear he'd done something seriously wrong by their standards. "You want real food?" he continued, pointing toward the corridor that led to his restaurant. His galactic standard was rough around the edges, but he could make himself understood. Hot food, clean food. The girl, Nara, though he didn't know her name yet, stared at him like he'd just offered to give her a spaceship. Her violet eyes went wide and she looked around nervously at all the other aliens who were now gathering to watch this impossible scene unfold. A security guard hurried. "It's over." His green skin flushed with what looked like panic. "Sir, you don't understand," he said to Jinho in heavily accented standard. "That one is marked exile. No contact permitted by galactic law." Jinho looked at the glowing marks on Nara's neck, then back at the security guard. "She's hungry," he said simply. "I have food." "But sir, the contamination protocols—" "What contamination?" Jinho interrupted. "She's not sick, she's starving." More aliens were gathering now, forming a small crowd around the alley entrance. They whispered and pointed, some recording the scene on their personal devices. A few looked disgusted, others seemed fascinated, as if they were watching someone break a fundamental law of physics. Nara shrank back against the wall, overwhelmed by all the attention. She'd been invisible for so long that having this many eyes on her felt like standing under a burning spotlight. Her hands trembled as she clutched the rotten fruit, unsure whether to run or stay. Jinho noticed her fear and took a step back to give her space. He kept his voice gentle and calm. "My restaurant is 2 levels up, Minho's kitchen. You know where the human sector is." She nodded slightly, still not quite believing this was real. "Good food there," Jinho continued, patting his stomach and smiling. "Rice, soup, vegetables, all fresh, all clean." He pulled out one of his meal vouchers and held it up so she could see it. "Free, no payment needed." The crowd around them grew larger. Someone called for additional security. A news drone appeared overhead, its camera lens focusing on the unprecedented scene of a human talking to an exile, as if she were a normal person. Nara looked at the voucher, then at Jinho's kind face, then at all the horrified aliens surrounding them. Everything in her life had taught her that this was impossible. Restaurants were for people who mattered. Exiles ate garbage and slept in shadows. That was how the universe worked, but this human didn't seem to know the rules. Or maybe he knew them and just didn't care. "Why?" she whispered, the word barely audible, Jinho heard her anyway. He shrugged and gave her another gentle smile. "Because you're hungry and I have food. That's reason enough." Behind him, someone was already making calls to report this violation of social protocol. But Jinho ignored them all, keeping his attention focused on the frightened girl who was still trying to decide if she dared to hope. Nara's feet barely made a sound as she followed Jinho through the station corridors. She stayed about 20 steps behind him, ready to disappear into the nearest hiding spot if this turned out to be some kind of cruel trick. Her heart hammered against her ribs with every step. Other aliens in the hallway stopped and stared when they saw her. Some covered their children's eyes. Others pulled out their communication devices, probably calling friends to tell them about the impossible thing they were witnessing. A few just stood there with their mouths hanging open, like they'd seen someone walking on the ceiling. Jinho walked slowly, checking over his shoulder every few seconds to make sure she was still following. He didn't seem bothered by all the attention they were getting. When a group of tall, grey-skinned officials tried to block his path, he simply said, "Excuse me," and walked around them. The human sector of the station looked different from the places where Nara usually hid. The lighting was warmer, more yellow, than the harsh white lights in the lower levels. There were actual plants growing in containers along the walls, real green things with leaves and flowers. She'd almost forgotten that life could be beautiful. As they got closer to the restaurant district, the smells hit her like a physical force. Her empty stomach cramped and twisted, responding to scents she could barely remember. Something sweet and spicy, something rich and savory. Her mouth watered for the first time in weeks. A small crowd had already gathered outside Minho's kitchen. Word traveled fast on space stations, especially when someone was breaking every social rule in the book. News drones hovered overhead like electronic vultures broadcasting the scene to viewers across the galaxy. Nara stopped at the edge of the crowd, suddenly terrified. This was really happening. This human was actually going to try to take her into a restaurant. Her, an exile. Someone who wasn't supposed to exist in polite society. The restaurant itself looked so normal it almost hurt to see. Warm light spilled through the windows onto the deck outside. She could see people inside sitting at tables, talking and laughing, while they ate. Families, friends, people who belonged somewhere. Jinho reached the door and turned around. When he saw her standing frozen at the back of the crowd, his expression softened with understanding. He knew she was scared. "It's okay," he called out in his rough galactic standard. "Just food. Just dinner." The crowd murmured disapprovingly. Someone shouted that he was violating health codes. Another voice warned about contamination. A security officer was pushing through the crowd, trying to reach them. But Jinho ignored all of it. He opened the restaurant door and the most amazing smell poured out, something like roasted meat and fresh bread and spices she couldn't identify. The warmth from inside touched her face like a gentle hand. "Come on," Jinho said patiently. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." Nara took one shaky step forward, then another. The crowd parted around her as if she carried some terrible disease. Some of them held their breath as she passed, others covered their noses with cloth, but Jinho just stood there holding the door open with a smile that never wavered, like he had all the time in the world, like she was worth waiting for. When she finally reached the doorway, she paused one last time. Once she crossed this threshold, there would be no going back. Everyone would know what she'd done. Everyone would know that someone had shown her kindness. She looked up at Jinho's weathered face and saw nothing but patience and warmth. Then she stepped inside. The inside of Minho's kitchen was like stepping into a different world. Soft music played from hidden speakers. The tables were made of real wood, not cold metal like everything else on the station. Pictures of Earth hung on the walls, green mountains, blue oceans, white clouds in an actual sky. Nara stood just inside the doorway, overwhelmed by how normal everything looked. Other customers glanced up from their meals, their conversations, dying as they realized what they were seeing. A few got up and left immediately, throwing money on their tables as they hurried out. Jinho guided her to a small table in the corner, away from the windows where the crowd outside couldn't see them as easily. The chair felt strange under her. She hadn't sat on furniture in so long that she'd forgotten how soft cushions could be. "1 minute," Jinho said, disappearing into the kitchen. Nara sat alone, trying not to touch anything. Everything was so clean. The table, the walls, even the floor looked like someone scrubbed it every day. She felt dirty and out of place, like a stain on something beautiful. Jinho returned carrying a tray, and Nara's breath caught in her throat. Steam rose from a large bowl filled with golden broth. Pieces of real meat and vegetables floated in the soup, carrots, onions, something. Green she didn't recognize. Beside it sat a chunk of bread that looked like it had just come from an oven, and a tall glass of water so clear it sparkled under the lights. He set everything in front of her without ceremony, as if feeding exiles was something he did every day. "Eat," he said simply. Nara stared at the meal like it might disappear if she blinked. The smell made her stomach cramp with desperate hunger, but she couldn't make herself move. This had to be a dream, or a test, or some kind of punishment she didn't understand yet. "It's okay," Jinho said gently. He sat down across from her with his own bowl. "See? Just food." He took a spoonful of his soup to show her it was safe. That broke something inside her. Tears started flowing down her cheeks as she picked up the spoon with shaking hands. The first taste of warm, seasoned broth on her tongue nearly made her sob out loud. It was so good it hurt, so different from the bitter scraps she'd been choking down for months. She tried to eat slowly to make it last, but her body betrayed her. She was so hungry that she found herself gulping the soup like she was dying of thirst. Broth dripped down her chin. She tore at the bread with her fingers, stuffing pieces into her mouth. Jinho pretended not to notice her desperation. He ate his own meal quietly, giving her space to feed herself without judgment. When she finally slowed down, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, he leaned forward slightly. "What's your name?" he asked in careful standard. "Nara," she whispered. It felt strange to say it out loud. Nobody had asked her name in so long. "I'm Jinho. This is my restaurant." He gestured around the room. "You live on the station?" She nodded, then tried to explain in her broken standard, mixed with gestures, how her family had arranged a mating contract with someone she couldn't stand, how she'd refused and been marked as defiant, how they'd cast her out to teach other young people what happened when you didn't obey. Jinho listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as he understood her story. When she pointed to the glowing marks on her neck, explaining how they branded her as untouchable, his jaw tightened with anger. "How long?" he asked. "How long alone?" 6 months, Nara said, and started crying again. By the next morning, everyone on Station Omega knew about the human who had fed an exile. The story spread through the communication networks faster than the computer virus. Videos of Nara walking into the restaurant played on news feeds across 17 different star systems. Jinho's message terminal beeped constantly with angry notifications. The Vorthan Trade Consortium sent an official statement saying they would cancel all shipping contracts with humans who violated basic social hygiene. 3 different alien restaurant owners demanded he be removed from the food service district. Someone had even started an online petition calling for his deportation, but the worst part was watching his regular customers disappear. Mrs. Zelon, who came in every Tuesday for noodle soup, crossed the street when she saw him. The construction crew that always ordered lunch on Fridays found somewhere else to eat. By the 3rd day, Jinho was serving meals to empty tables while angry protesters gathered outside his windows. "You're destroying yourself over one exile," Security Chief Daeho said, sliding into the booth across from Jinho during the lunch rush that wasn't rushing at all. Daeho was human too, which made his visit feel like a betrayal. "The station council is getting pressure from 12 different species to shut you down." Jinho looked up from the inventory sheets he was pretending to read. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Nara carefully washing dishes, her movements still nervous and careful like she expected someone to yell at her. Over the past week, some color had returned to her pale blue skin. She didn't flinch every time someone walked past anymore. "She's learning to cook," Jinho said quietly. "Yesterday she made rice without burning it. That's not the point." Daeho leaned forward, his voice urgent. "The Galactic Health Authority wants to inspect your kitchen for contamination. The religious council says you're corrupting their sacred traditions. Even the Human Colonial Authority is getting complaints about one of their citizens causing diplomatic incidents. Through the window, Jinho could see the protesters holding signs in multiple languages. Most of them said things like, "Respect our laws" and "Humans go home." A few were more creative with their insults. "You know what's funny?" Jinho said, still watching Nara work. "Half these species at war with each other for centuries. They can't agree on anything. Trade routes, territory boundaries, cultural exchanges. But the moment one human shows basic kindness to someone they've thrown away, suddenly they're all best friends united against us." Deho sighed. "Look, I get it. She seems like a nice kid. But you're one person fighting against thousands of years of alien social structure. You can't win this." That's when Nara appeared at their table carrying 2 steaming bowls of soup. Her hands barely shook as she set them down, a huge improvement from her first day when she'd been too nervous to hold anything steady. "Thank you," Deho said automatically, then caught himself. He wasn't supposed to interact with her, but she'd already smiled and hurried back to the kitchen before he could figure out how to fix his mistake. "She taught herself Galactic Standard from my recipe books," Jinho said, tasting the soup. It was actually good, better than some meals he'd made himself. "Stays up late reading the cooking instructions. Asked me yesterday if she could learn to make bread." "Jinho, you want to know what she told me?" Jinho interrupted. "She said this is the first time in 6 months she's gone to sleep without being hungry, the first time she's felt safe, the first time someone treated her like she was worth something." Deho ate his soup in silence for a while, watching the protesters outside. Finally, he spoke. "The council meets tomorrow. They're voting on whether to revoke your business license. Then I guess we'll see what happens tomorrow." Deho left without finishing his meal, but not before leaving payment on the table. Enough to cover both bowls plus a generous tip. That evening, Nara helped Jinho close the restaurant like she had every night that week. As they cleaned the last table together, she looked up at him with those violet eyes that were slowly losing their haunted look. "Why you do this?" she asked in her improving standard. "Everyone hates you now because of me." Jinho smiled and handed her a clean towel. "Everyone who matters is right here in this kitchen." The restaurant door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. Station Administrator Goran marched in like he owned the place, his insect-like body towering over the tables. His forearms gestured wildly, while his mandibles clicked together in rapid, angry bursts, a sound that meant serious trouble in his species. Behind him came 6 armed security guards from different alien races, their weapons clearly visible but not yet drawn. The message was obvious. This wasn't a friendly visit. This ends now. Goran's translator box crackled with static as his fury overwhelmed the device. 2 weeks of violations, 2 weeks of chaos. The entire sector is demanding action. At the corner table, Jinho didn't even look up. He was showing Nara how to fold dumplings, his weathered hands guiding her blue fingers as they pinched the dough closed. "Little more water on the edges," he said calmly and standard. "Helps them stick better." Nara's hands trembled, not from the delicate work, but from the terrifying presence that had just invaded their peaceful evening. The glowing marks on her neck pulsed brighter, responding to her stress. "Are you ignoring me, human?" Goran's voice rose to a screech that made the windows rattle. "I am speaking to you." Jinho finally looked up, his expression as calm as still water. "I heard you. Half the station probably heard you." He turned back to Nara. "See how the pleats should face the same direction? Makes them cook more evenly." The security guards shifted nervously. They'd expected the human to jump up, maybe argue or beg. Nobody just ignored Administrator Goran when he was this angry. It wasn't natural. You are harboring a marked exile, in direct violation of Galactic Health Code 47B, Station Regulation 12, and the sacred contamination laws of 6 different species. Goran's mandibles clicked so fast they sounded like static. "The council has voted. This establishment is closed. The exile will be removed to proper containment." That's when Jinho finally stood up. He wasn't a big man, average height, maybe, a little stocky from years of cooking good food. But something in his posture made the armed guards take a step back. "She's eating dinner," Jinho said quietly. "In my restaurant. which I own, on property I lease legally from the station authority. His voice never rose, but it carried clearly to every corner of the room. You have a problem with basic human decency? Decency? Goran's translator sparked again. You call this decency? You've disrupted trade agreements worth millions of credits. 7 species have filed formal complaints. The Vorthon delegation threatened to leave the station entirely. Because I fed someone who was hungry? Because you contaminated. She's not contaminated, Jinho interrupted, his voice still eerily calm. She's not sick. She's not dangerous. She's just someone your society decided wasn't worth caring about. By now, word had spread through the station's communication networks. People were gathering outside the restaurant, some angry protesters, some curious onlookers, some news drones broadcasting the confrontation live to viewers across known space. Nara sat frozen at the table, a half-folded dumpling clutched in her fingers. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Nobody defied the exile system without consequences. She started to stand, ready to surrender herself to end Jinho's suffering, but Jinho put a gentle hand on her shoulder, keeping her seated. Finish. Your dumpling, he said softly. We're not done with the lesson. The crowd outside had grown larger. News reporters pushed closer to the windows. Security Chief Daiho arrived, looking uncomfortable as he surveyed the scene. Even some human colonists had shown up, their faces grim with determination. This is your final warning, Goran announced. Remove the exile or face the consequences. Jinho picked up another piece of dumpling dough and placed it in front of Nara. What consequences? He asked. For treating someone like a person instead. Of garbage? The standoff stretched on, neither side willing to back down while the galaxy watched and waited to see what would happen next. The video went viral across 17 star systems in less than 6 hours. Someone in the crowd had recorded the entire confrontation, Jinho calmly teaching Nara to fold dumplings while Administrator Goran screamed threats. The gentle way the human kept his hand on her shoulder when she tried to surrender. His quiet question about treating people like garbage instead of persons. By morning, the clip had been viewed 40 million times. Human colonies throughout the galaxy exploded with outrage. On New Sol, protesters marched through the capital, carrying signs that read, "Human values matter." The Mars Trade Council issued an emergency statement supporting their citizens' right to operate by human moral standards. Even the quiet farming colonies in the Outer Rim sent messages of solidarity. But the real shock came when the threats started. No more cargo shipments to stations that persecute humans for basic kindness, announced the Merchant Marine Union. No more technical support for colonies that punish decency, declared the Engineers Guild. Within 48 hours, humanity's economic contributions, which many alien species had taken for granted, suddenly felt very important. Nara watched it all unfold from the restaurant kitchen, where she'd been promoted from dishwasher to assistant chef. Her hands moved skillfully now as she chopped vegetables for the evening soup, but her violet eyes stayed fixed on the news feeds playing on Jinho's wall screen. Look at this, she said in her much-improved standard, pointing to a live broadcast. From Kepler Station. A line of exiles stretched around 3 city blocks, all waiting outside a human-run cafe called Second Chances. Most were from species she'd never seen before. Some with scales, others with fur, a few that looked like walking crystals. Same thing happening on Arcturus colony, Jinho replied, seasoning a pot of stew. And Terra Nova, and the mining stations. Near Jupiter. He paused in his stirring. Humans are opening their restaurants to anyone who's hungry. Doesn't matter what marks they wear or what their own people think of them. The news anchor, a professional-looking Zenthari with silver skin, struggled to maintain her composure as she reported. What started as one incident on Station Omega has become what sociologists are calling the largest challenge to galactic social order in recorded history. Exiles across known space are emerging from hiding, seeking sanctuary at human establishments. Nara set down her knife and walked to the window. Outside Minho's kitchen, their own line had formed. Not as long as some of the others she'd seen on the feeds, but still remarkable. A young Vorthon male with fresh exile marks sat next to an elderly hegemony female whose scales had dulled with age and neglect. They didn't speak to each other. Different species, different languages. but they shared the same desperate hope. In their eyes, "They come because they hear about me," Nara said quietly. "Because they see that someone cared." "No," Jinho corrected, joining her at the window. "They come because they're hungry, and humans believe hungry people deserve food. Simple as that." A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. The Galactic Trade Commission was calling an emergency session. Stock prices for human-produced goods were skyrocketing as alien buyers rushed to secure contracts before potential embargoes took effect. 3 major shipping companies had already switched their headquarters to human-controlled space. "The economic implications are staggering," the news anchor continued. "Human colonies control 30% of rare mineral extraction, 40% of advanced manufacturing, and nearly 60% of interstellar cargo transport. If they follow through on their threats..." Administrator Goran appeared on screen, his mandibles clicking frantically as reporters shouted questions. "This is temporary insanity," he insisted. "Order will be restored. The exile system has maintained social stability for thousands of years." But even as he spoke, more exiles were arriving at human establishments across the galaxy. The system that had kept societies unwanted invisible was crumbling, one meal at a time. Nara turned back to her prep work, a small smile playing on her lips. Through the kitchen doorway, she could see Jinho greeting the first exile in their line, a teenage Quarks whose blue spots had faded from malnutrition. "Welcome to Minho's kitchen," she heard him say. "You hungry?" The revolution had found its voice, and it spoke in the simple language of shared meals and open doors. 6 months had passed since that first night when Nara ate garbage behind the waste containers. Now she moved through Minho's kitchen like she'd been born there, her knife work precise and confident as she prepared vegetables for the evening rush. The lunch crowd had just finished, leaving behind empty plates and the satisfied chatter of full bellies. The restaurant looked completely different now. Where once there had been mostly empty tables and angry protesters outside, now every seat was filled with an incredible mix of species. A family of Zenthari sat next to 2 former Vorthon exiles who worked at the human bakery down the corridor. 3 Quarks engineers shared a table with an elderly hegemony woman who'd started her own small cafe after learning to cook from Jinho's online tutorials. "Behind you, hot soup coming through," called Min Jin, the newest member of their kitchen staff. He'd been an exile too, cast out from his people for refusing military service. Now he wore a clean apron and smiled as he worked, his once hollow cheeks filled out from regular meals and steady work. Nara stepped aside smoothly, never pausing in her chopping rhythm. Her movements had become natural, automatic, the result of months of practice and Jinho's patient teaching. The glowing marks on her neck had faded to soft silver lines, barely visible unless you knew to look for them. They no longer burned with shame. Instead, they reminded her of how far she'd traveled from that desperate girl eating scraps in the dark. "Order up," Jinho called from the stove, sliding 2 steaming bowls across the pass window. His hair had gotten grayer in the past months, and new lines had appeared around his eyes. Running a restaurant that fed anyone who walked through the door wasn't easy work. But his smile was as warm as ever when he looked at his bustling kitchen full of former outcasts who'd become family. The evening news played on the wall screen as it did every night now. The anchor was reporting on the latest developments in what historians were already calling the Great Awakening. Human-operated establishments continue to open across the galaxy at an unprecedented rate, she announced. The Exile Sanctuary movement has now spread to over 300 star systems, with more than 50,000 former exiles finding employment in human businesses. Nara glanced up at the screen while she worked, watching footage of ribbon-cutting ceremonies at new restaurants, repair shops, and trading posts. All of them flew the same simple banner, a circle with an open door in the center, the universal symbol that meant everyone welcome here. The political landscape had shifted dramatically. The old alliance structures were crumbling as species chose sides between the traditional exile system and humanity's radical inclusion policies. Some alien governments had banned their citizens from doing business with humans entirely. Others had quietly started reforming their own laws, pressured by internal groups who'd seen the success of the human model. "Any regrets?" Jinho asked, quietly, appearing beside Nara's prep station with a cup of tea. It was a question he'd asked her several times over the months, usually when the news showed particularly angry protests or when former customers sent especially nasty messages. Nara set down her knife and looked around the bustling restaurant. Through the kitchen doorway, she could see Kyung-soo taking an order from a mixed group that included 3 different species and at least 2 former exiles. The Zenthari family was teaching their young daughter to use chopsticks while she giggled at her clumsy attempts. Near the window, an elderly human trader was sharing stories with a scarred Vorthan dock worker, both of them laughing at some shared joke. "You didn't just feed my body," she said, her standard now flawless after months of practice. "You fed my soul. You gave me back my name, my dignity, my future. How could I regret any of that?" Outside the window, another human cargo ship was docking at the station. Nara could see the crew already unloading equipment for what looked like another restaurant setup. The revolution that had started with 1 bowl of soup in 1 small kitchen continued to spread, 1 meal at a time, 1 open door at a time. BT. Galaxy was learning a simple lesson that humans had always known. Everyone deserves a seat at the table.